a man of status, a man of privilege, a man probably of wealth, a leader in the community, puts himself at risk, coming to Jesus. The crowds have been following Jesus as he zigzags back and forth across a lake. On one side, the Jews, on the other side, Gentiles, Greeks, and Romans. And he goes back and forth. And every time he lands in Israel, a crowd has gathered. And this crowd scares the people who know that crowds catch the attention of the Roman Empire, that crowds are dangerous because they symbolize rebellion. They symbolize an overturning and an upturning, a potential revolution to the way that the world is. And this man, Jairus, knows this. He's no fool. He is an authority. He is a leader. And he comes to Jesus as a leader comes to a leader. He comes to Jesus. He acknowledges Jesus's authority. He kneels before him as one would kneel to a leader greater than yourself, and begs, come and heal my daughter. Come and heal this 12-year-old little girl who is sick, who is unable to enjoy our life as a family together, who is unable to play with children next door, who can no longer join us in the marketplace. Come and heal my daughter. And Jesus says, okay. And Jesus goes with him and follows him. And the expectation of the crowd must be high. A leader of the people who are coming together around Jesus, a leader among other leaders who are very worried about Jesus, has asked Jesus to do what Jesus has been doing for everyone that has been flooding and flocking to him. Heal a loved one that is ill and restore her place in the community. And they expect Jesus to follow this man because that's what you do with other leaders, right? Respect breeds respect. Jairus has come to him as a leader. Jesus recognizes this is an important man in the community, a big man on campus, and he is going to go and help this man. I'm sure the crowd is talking. And all of a sudden, Jesus stops. Surrounded by people, he stops and asks a completely ridiculous question. Who touched me? Who touched my clothing? Really? Have you guys been in a crowd? A crowd of people pre-pandemic when no one was trying to keep some kind of distance? Walking in a crowd, traveling from one place to the other, and everybody touches. You're constantly brushing people. You're probably stepping on people's heels. You're bumping them with an elbow. Someone rushes up behind you. Someone stops suddenly in front of you and you bump. Of course you touch people. Jesus stops and asks, who touched me? And his disciples basically ask, are you crazy? Are you kidding? How could you possibly figure that out? More importantly, who cares? Who cares that somebody touched you in this crowd? There's lots of touching happening. But Jesus cares. Jesus stops and he asks the question. And honestly, for the person who touched him, that question is terrifying because she is not Jairus. She does not come to Jesus as an authority, asking Jesus to exercise his authority on her behalf. She comes up behind Jesus. She slips through the crowd. Given that she's been hemorrhaging blood for 12 years, she's spent all her money on physicians and has been bankrupted. How many of you have experienced medical debt or know somebody who has experienced medical debt? This is a woman who has lost everything because she has been sick as long as this leader's daughter has been alive. Moving through the crowd, people probably not all that excited to touch her, right? Oh, kind of doing that move that happens when you don't want to touch someone who maybe smells, maybe isn't all that clean, is poor and dirty. You just don't want to get them on you. In a world where uncleanliness actually meant that you could not enjoy friends and family, this woman slips through the crowd and reaches out and touches Jesus, knowing that all she has to do is touch him. She doesn't need to talk to him. She doesn't need to ask him a question. She does not need to present her case before him. She doesn't need to tell him anything about what her life has been like for 12 years. She just needs to touch him and he will heal her. She knows it. Healing is not only possible, it is happening. And it happens. It happens. She touches him. He heals her. God heals her. Something happens in that moment, and Jesus knows it. And Jesus, on his way with an important leader of the community, stops, asks a question, and she, in fear and trembling, answers that question. She comes up and she tells him the whole truth. 12 years worth of truth. My guess is that wasn't a very rehearsed speech. It takes time to condense 12 years into just, 1 or 2 minutes. Those of us who've engaged in some conversations around advocating for our unhoused neighbors know how hard it is to get everything you want to say in 2 minutes. Pretty sure this woman didn't do that. It probably took her a while. And she stumbled through parts of her story, and she told him how she felt now and how she felt a few years ago and what it was like to start and the failures and the loss of the money in her family and all the things that mattered to her. 12 years of story, the whole truth. Jesus just stops and he listens. He listens to the whole truth. And while he's doing this, while he's listening to a woman who should never have touched him, that is a big no-no in this world. You do not touch someone if you are unclean yourself. You certainly don't tell your whole story to a leader, pouring out your heart in the middle of a crowd where his followers are clearly not pleased. Jesus stops and listens, and while she is doing this big man's daughter, she dies. She dies, and the friends and family come and find the leader and say, "Don't bother Jesus anymore. Your daughter's dead." Imagine that moment of fear and trembling. Imagine that moment when Jairus hears that his beloved child, his 12-year-old little girl on the verge of becoming an adult, is dead. There's no future for her. He must have been filled with grief and fear and maybe a little bit of anger. If Jesus had not stopped for this woman, had not taken the time to listen to this woman pour out a story, maybe his daughter would be alive. And Jesus, he hears what they've said, and he understands how we react to bad news. And he immediately turns to the leader of the synagogue and says, "Do not fear, have faith." He says to the leader of the synagogue, "Do not fear, have faith," immediately after he has told this woman, "Your faith has made you well." This woman who came to him in fear is a picture of faith. And this leader of the synagogue, this leader of the people of faith, this faith leader is afraid. In that moment, his faith has dissipated. And Jesus tells this leader of the synagogue to be like a woman who has been unclean for years. Jesus tells this paragon and picture of faith to be exactly like this paragon and picture of not faith, of a lack of faith. The only reason you could be sick for 12 years is probably because there was something wrong with your faith. That was the belief. Jesus tells this man to have faith like this woman. And then Jesus does something beautiful. He goes to the man's house. He's laughed at and scorned by the people who know that this little girl is dead when he says, oh no, she's just sleeping. For whatever reason, Jesus doesn't want to call attention to this. And he invites just his friends and the mother and the father in to a room with the body of their child laying on a bed. He pushes away the crowd. All that touching and noise and laughter and derision and weeping and wailing, he pushes it away and he creates this space of quiet just with those closest to this little girl, closest to Jesus. He takes up her hand and she tells her, little girl, wake up, as if she's just sleeping. And this little girl, the daughter of a privileged man, a daughter who is probably a well sought after friend and soon to be a well sought after bride, this daughter is healed, 12 years old. Just like a woman who has been sick as long as she has been alive, she is restored to community. She is restored to health and her body and her family. Jesus cares for everybody. Jesus wants to heal everybody, rich and poor alike, powerful and weak alike. But unlike the world around us, Jesus isn't only going to follow the privileged. He isn't only going to heal the powerful, those who have the means and the right to come and present their case before him in front of all of the people. He isn't going to listen to just the loudest voice in the room. Jesus always stops for those in need. Jesus always stops for the poor and the vulnerable and the sick, the people that we don't stop for, the people that we don't talk to, the people that we don't want to touch us. Jesus stops for them. That's what it means when theologians talk about the option for the poor, that God has this particular love for the poor. It's not because God doesn't want all of creation and all of people to flourish, but because God understands that in our world, we don't stop for the poor. We don't stop for those who are vulnerable. We don't stop for those who are oppressed. What we tell them is get on board. Do it the way we do it. Join us. But that's not the call of Jesus. That's not the life of Jesus. Jesus stops. He makes time and space, whether it is in a crowd or a child's bedroom. He makes the time and the space needed to provide the healing that each of us needs, whether it is simply the sickness of a 12-year-old child or the 12-year sickness of a woman who has lost everything. That is the possible healing of Jesus. That is the healing of Jesus that is happening now. Amen.